Iching had long since stopped counting the hours he spent at the office. What he did count, with bitter precision, was the shrinking number on his monthly paycheck, smaller every cycle, despite the fact that he was working more than ever. Tonight was no different. He finally pushed through the glass doors of his company building and into the cold city air, shoulders hunched, mind already half asleep. He just wanted to go home. But when he reached his electric scooter, he stopped cold. The battery compartment hung open, stripped clean. In its place, someone had left a note. He didn't even bother reading it. He crumpled it in his fist and looked around at the row of shared bikes along the curb. Every single dock empty. A taxi was out of the question. He did the math in his head, winced, and started walking. 5 kilometers. Fine. He could manage 5 kilometers. He could not manage 5 kilometers. 20 minutes in, his legs gave out on him. He sat down heavily on the edge of the sidewalk, breathless and slightly humiliated, and lit a cigarette. Above him, the city blazed with lights, advertisements, office towers still glowing, the endless, restless pulse of a place that never stopped demanding things from people like him. He thought about the version of himself that had graduated 4 years ago, full of ambition and strange hope. That person felt like someone else entirely. The salary that was supposed to grow had instead withered. The stable life he'd been promised had dissolved. His girlfriend had left, quietly, without drama, which somehow made it worse. And his parents, far away in a smaller city, grew older every month while he sent home just enough money to keep himself from feeling guilty. Get up, he told himself. Go home. He stood. The world tilted. A wave of dizziness rolled through him, and he stumbled sideways off the curb, directly into the path of a construction truck making a wide turn in the dark. The driver never saw him. Iching was in a blind spot. He heard a tremendous crash. He heard the shriek of brakes. Then he heard nothing at all. The first thing Iching noticed was the silence. The second thing was the floor. It was blue, not painted blue. It moved, shifting and rippling like the surface of still water, disturbed by something far below. The room around, it was pure white, featureless, the kind of white that made you feel like you were standing inside a thought rather than a place. A woman appeared. She walked toward him with calm, unhurried steps, dressed in silver and blue, her posture carrying the quiet authority of someone who had introduced herself to confused, dead people many times before. My name is Zero, she said. I head the Time-Space Administration, Node A3754. She snapped her fingers. The white room dissolved. In its place, the universe. Stars cascaded in every direction, ancient and indifferent, and somewhere in the middle of the display floated a small blue-green marble that Iching recognized immediately as home. Zero explained her organization's purpose with professional efficiency. They monitored worlds, occasionally intervened, kept the vast machinery of existence running more or less smoothly. It was, she admitted, a fairly large operation. And what does any of this have to do with me? Iching asked. I'm an overworked man who couldn't afford a taxi. Zero paused. The pause was a fraction too long. About that, she said. You were an accident. Iching stared at her. Your death, she clarified, with a slight wince. It wasn't scheduled. It wasn't part of any plan. You simply walked into a blind spot at the wrong moment, and now here we are. He opened his mouth, closed it. The full weight of it settled over him. Not grief exactly, more like the particular exhaustion of someone who has just learned that even their death was unremarkable. Zero, to her credit, apologized. She also, somewhat less to her credit, had been visibly trying not to smile. You have 2 options, she said, adopting a more professional tone. You can join the Time-Space Administration, or you can be reborn in another world. I'm afraid returning to your original body isn't possible. The damage was too extensive for Earth's medical technology to repair. My parents, Iching said immediately. Zero's expression shifted. She gestured, and the star field faded into a clean, quiet office. On a screen in the corner, he could see them, his mother and father, aged and grieving, sitting beside what he understood to be his grave. He felt something crack open in his chest. I've already taken care of them, Zero said gently. I use what resources I have to ensure they'll live comfortably. They'll be looked after. They won't struggle. She paused. My mistake means I'll face consequences of my own. Likely reassignment to active duty for a few thousand years. That's my problem to deal with, not yours. Iching looked at his parents on the screen for a long time. Then he looked away. Another world, he said. I want a farm. Zero blinked. Of all the requests she had processed, this was apparently not among the most common. But she recovered quickly and smiled. Genuinely this time. Starter gifts, she said, producing a long and glittering list. Choose 5. He studied the list carefully. A shape-shifting multi-tool, described as capable of transforming into any implement needed for work. A dream pouch for storage, seemingly much larger inside than out. A suit of spirit armor for protection. A guide to other worlds, functioning like a living encyclopedia of wherever he landed. And for his 5th choice, he pushed the list back and looked at her directly. Just make me harder to kill, he said. Whatever you could do to my base stats, do it. Zero nodded, something approving in her expression. I'll adjust everything during the transfer. She opened a portal. It churned with light and motion, pulling at him like current. He turned back for one last look at the screen. It had changed. His parents were in a hospital room, laughing. His co-workers surrounded them, chatting, the atmosphere warm and light. He was there too, in the bed, breathing, very much alive. A bandaged, unconscious version of him lay hooked to monitors while everyone around him smiled. Iching's eyes went wide. You, he started. The portal swallowed him whole. He arrived in noise and disorientation, tumbling out of the portal and landing hard on soil that smelled of deep earth and old magic. When he collected himself enough to look around, he found trees, enormous, ancient trees pressing in from every direction, their canopies blocking out most of the sky. The air was thick and alive in a way city air never was. He opened his guide, and information flowed into his mind like water into a cup. He was on a planet called Zygiana, on a large continent home to many races and civilizations. The particular patch of wilderness he'd landed in was called the Devil's Forest, a vast, monster-inhabited territory that no sensible person ventured into alone. Iching looked around at the towering trees and the deep shadows between them. Fine, he said aloud. He was still furious at Zero, and said so loudly to the open sky, which responded by sending a bolt of lightning directly into the top of his head. The crack of it knocked him sideways. His hair stood on end. Smoke curled from his mouth when he opened it in shock. He was not dead. He wasn't even particularly injured. He stood there for a moment, one hand patting at his singed hair, then nodded slowly. Whatever Zero had done to him before sending him through, it seemed to have worked. He found a nearby stream, cleaned himself up, and began walking. The guide proved immediately invaluable. Within the first hour of walking, Iching had used it to identify which plants were edible, which animals were approachable, and which berries wouldn't kill him. He collected seeds as he went, stuffing them carefully into his storage pouch, already planning. His first priority was shelter. He followed the stream until he reached a rocky cliff face, found no natural cave large enough to use, and made a decision that would have seemed impossible the day before. He would carve one himself. The multi-tool was waiting for him. The moment he thought of what he needed, it shifted in his hands, a heavy chisel, a stone hammer. He picked them up, expecting the long, grinding labor of hand-cutting rock, and instead discovered that a single tap of the chisel sank it into the cliff face like a knife in his soft cheese. One swing of the hammer knocked loose a head-sized chunk without any particular effort. He stared at the tools. The tools said nothing. He carved a cave in a fraction of the time he'd expected, leveled the floor, used the transformed multi-tool as an axe to fell hardwood trees, and built himself a simple but solid bed frame. For bedding, he used palm leaves. It wasn't luxurious. It was shelter, and it was his. He was hungry. He took the multi-tool, now a spear, to the stream and spent a comically long time failing to catch fish. He fell in twice. A small audience of birds apparently gathered to watch. But eventually, aided by his remarkable new physical strength and the spear's impossible precision, he came away with 5 small perch. He built a fire, cooked his dinner, and hung his wet clothes to dry. That was when he discovered another gift's full capabilities. The spirit armor coat, still on his back, began to glow softly. It examined his situation, formed its own opinion, and transformed itself without being asked into a dry, well-fitted outfit that suited him considerably better than soggy work clothes. He looked down at himself. "Convenient," he said approvingly. After eating, curiosity drove him to test the edges of his new strength. He'd spotted a massive tree root nearby and, purely on a whim, tried dragging it back toward the cave. He managed nearly a kilometer without breaking a sweat. He shaped it into a door. That night, he sat in the cave entrance and looked up at two moons hanging in an unfamiliar sky. He felt something he hadn't felt in years, possibly longer. Not happiness exactly, but the clean, uncomplicated sensation of having done a day's work that was entirely his own. No targets, no performance reviews, no shrinking bachik. He went inside, closed the root door, and slept. The days that followed had a rhythm to them, and eaching found the rhythm deeply satisfying. Mornings meant fishing and checking traps he'd built from memory of old survival games. His catches improved quickly. The Devil's Forest, for all its fearsome reputation, was full of peculiar but docile animals. Rabbit-headed chickens, creatures that combined features of familiar species in improbable ways, as though someone had reshuffled the animal kingdom and let the cards fall where they would. He built torches, a drying rack, and a shower. He was, he decided, considerably better suited to survival life than to office life. The strange absence of monsters puzzled him. According to the guide, the Devil's Forest was one of the densest concentrations of powerful magical creatures on the continent. But in weeks of living here, he'd encountered nothing threatening. Only ordinary-seeming animals that, at most, watched him curiously. When he felt ready, he left the cave and moved to a flat clearing near where he'd first landed. The lightning burn mark from his arrival was still visible, a perfect landmark. He began cutting timber. The multi-tool worked at astonishing speed. Trees fell in rapid succession, fast enough to send all the nearby animals scattering in alarm. He shaped the logs and spent nearly 2 weeks on the labor, but when it was done, a neat cabin stood where nothing had been before. He used the tool's carving capability to add a name above the door. Ying's home. Now, for the actual farming. He cleared an acre of land behind the cabin, pulling roots and breaking up soil. Then, inspired by what felt like a clever shortcut, he dug a firebreak trench, set the cleared ground alight to enrich the soil, and watched his modest controlled burn transform very rapidly into something that was not controlled at all. He spent a frantic stretch of time running buckets of water from the stream, moving at speeds a city worker body could never have managed. Just as the fire reached the trench, the sky went dark. Rain came down hard and heavy, as though called. Sitting in the wet ash afterward, Iching thought he heard a distant voice murmur something about recklessness. He chose not to investigate this. He planted his rice, wild bitter rice seeds he'd collected, about 1 kilogram of them, irrigating by hand with a multi-tool shaped into a watering can. Row by careful row, the acre was planted. He prayed to no one in particular for a decent harvest. Iching had other things to attend to. With the fire having driven most nearby animals away, he ranged further to hunt, following the stream deeper into the forest. That was where he encountered his first genuinely magical creature, a holy spirit deer, 3 meters tall, its white fur catching the light as though made from it. A soft halo floated above its antlers. He braced himself for a fight. The deer approached, knelt before him, and bathed him in warm golden light that touched him gently and left no mark. Then it stood, regarded him with eyes full of something he couldn't name, and walked away. He stared after it for a long moment. Then, on the way home, he stumbled across a clearing where a bear and a group of wild boars had apparently decided to resolve some long-standing territorial dispute without his involvement. He simply waited. When the dust settled, he gathered the fallen bodies, several nests worth of eggs, and a honeycomb the size of his torso. He had not hunted. He had merely collected. Pondering this, he arrived home and stopped walking. The rice field, planted that same morning, had already sprouted. Not just sprouted, the seedlings were visibly growing. He could watch them move upward if he looked at the right angle. The whole row of them, straight and green, pushing steadily toward the light. He crouched at the field's edge for a very long time. Then his mind shifted into the gear it had spent years training for. Careful, methodical, systematic. He went and cut himself a length of straight wood, fashioned a stone tool from materials at hand, and set up a comparison experiment. 2 plots, one prepared and tended using the multi-tool, one done entirely by hand with tools he'd made himself. Same seeds, same soil, same water, only the tool was different. He planted moonstar flowers in both, covered them, watered them equally, and waited. The results were clear by the next morning. The plot touched by the multi-tool had already produced a small seedling. The handmade tool plot had just barely sprouted. Over the following days, Iching ran further tests, varying which stages of cultivation used a magical tool, and arrived at a clean conclusion. The more the tool was involved in any given stage of growth, the faster and more robust the plants became. Speed, quality, yield, everything improved. Efficiency, 100%, he muttered to himself, touching his chin. And it affects the offspring, too. He watched his bitter rice mature in a fraction of the time it should have taken. The wild variety was normally short, sparse, thin-grained. What grew in Iching's field stood tall and heavy, the grain heads fat and golden, resembling a completely different plant from the original seeds. When he harvested and threshed and spread the grain to dry on mats woven from bamboo, the yield was smaller than he wanted. He hadn't had much seed to begin with, but the quality was remarkable. He kept a portion for eating and replanted the rest. The next harvest would be larger, and the one after that, larger still. He had what he needed. Now he needed more to grow. Finding seeds became its next great project. He took the guide and walked through the forest like a botanist on a field expedition, stopping to examine plants, cross-referencing with the guide's knowledge, occasionally tasting a leaf when the guide confirmed it was safe. He moved slowly and with attention, cataloging everything he found. Snakescale melon, the flavor of cucumber, the texture of something crisper. Jade leaf, a broad dark green that wilted beautifully in heat. A mysterious vine fruit with the tangy sweetness of tomato. And spices, a cluster of small red fruits that burned on the tongue exactly like chili pepper, which he collected with the reverence one might give a holy relic. The possibilities for cooking expanded enormously in a single afternoon. He cleared new land, organized it into sections, rice behind the house, vegetables to one side, spices and fruits in dedicated patches, and planted everything with careful attention, using the multi-tool at every stage. As he worked, he found himself chanting quietly to himself, a small song about digging holes and counting seeds in land that belonged to him, where whatever he planted would grow just fine. It was undignified. He did not stop. By the time 3 months had passed, Iching was entirely self-sufficient. The cleared land surrounding the cabin was fully cultivated on 3 sides. The cabin itself had been expanded to twice its original size, a living area on one side, a kitchen on the other. He'd built wooden furniture, a proper bed, chairs with backs, a table that didn't wobble. The kitchen had shelves and a stone stove and pots and bowls he'd shaped himself. A small storage shed stood next to the cabin, and beneath it, a cellar kept the processed grain cool and preserved. He had opinions about storage. Specifically, food should be properly wrapped before going into the magical pouch, not just dropped and loose. The dream pouch maintained almost freezer-like conditions, which was useful, but there was a principle involved. His rabbit-headed chickens had multiplied. He had a coop. He had a small livestock operation beginning. One evening, sitting at his doorstep with a cup of hot water, he looked down at the clear liquid and thought, "Tea. I should find a plant that makes tea." Then from somewhere in the distance, a massive explosion shook the forest. Birds erupted from the canopy in every direction. Thick smoke rose and hung in the distant sky. Every instinct Iching had developed in his previous life as a cautious, pragmatic city worker told him clearly, "This is not your problem. Stay home." but he'd been talking to his compass for company. That was where he was at, socially. He took his multi-tool and followed the direction of the smoke. The crater was 10 meters wide, still steaming, its edges blackened by intense heat. The trees around it had been flattened by the shock wave, leaving a bare clearing in the forest. At the center of it, floating in midair, was a woman in a white robe, her long hair drifting on a wind that seemed to come from the magic itself. Beside her floated a sapphire-inlaid staff, crackling with blue-black lightning. Opposite her was a lion-bodied creature with golden horns, its mane standing on end, a charge of golden energy gathering at the tip of its tail. Iching climbed a tree and watched. The woman raised both hands. Lightning gathered at the staff's head and struck downward in a blinding column. The beast released its golden energy simultaneously. The forces met between them with a sound like the world splitting, and then slowly, steadily, the opposing pressures canceled each other. Both fighters were exhausted. The woman's body swayed in the air. The beast still had something left. She's going to lose, Iching thought, shifting his weight. The branch under his foot snapped. Both the woman and the beast turned at once toward the sound. They saw a completely ordinary-looking young man crouching in a tree, holding an unremarkable walking stick, blinking back at them. "Run!" the woman shouted, alarmed. "It's dangerous." The beast, however, was not looking at the woman. It was staring at Iching with an expression that cycled rapidly through surprise, calculation, and something very much like unease. It let out a low growl. Then, without warning, it began backing away. Its retreat became a run. Within seconds, it was gone. The woman, whose entire body had been running on sheer willpower, finally let go of the effort she'd been sustaining. She dropped from the air. Iching caught her. She was unconscious before she reached the ground, breathing steadily, no visible wounds, but deeply spent. He picked up her fallen staff, tucked it carefully, and carried her back to his cabin. "I want to be clear," he said to no one in particular, "that this is entirely a practical decision." She woke to the smell of chicken soup. Her name was Kylan, a white-robed mage from the kingdom of Pelin, just one rank below the highest-tier purple robe. She had been tracking valuable magical materials in the forest's outer regions when the horned lion had chased her deep into territory no sensible mage entered alone. She sat up in a simple wooden cabin, clean, neat, unexpectedly well-organized. When Iching knocked and came in with food, she politely attempted to decline. Her stomach announced, in terms that left no room for interpretation, that it disagreed with this decision. Her face went crimson. He served her rice and soup without comment, ate a bite himself to demonstrate its safety, and filled her bowl. She asked for a knife and fork. He didn't have any. What he had was chopsticks, and he taught her to use them. She dropped a piece of chicken exactly 3 times and then managed the 4th with perfect precision. He praised her. She lifted the chopsticks thoughtfully. "Wisdom and skill are essential for a mage," she said. "Once you understand the key, most things become straightforward." "Is this a tradition from your homeland?" "Part of its culture," he said. "There's a lot of meaning behind it." They ate and talked. She introduced herself properly. He introduced himself as Iching, a recluse from a very distant place. Then, partway through the meal, something struck him. "Am I speaking the common tongue right now?" Kylan looked at him strangely. "We've been using it the whole time." He dipped his finger in water and wrote 3 words on the table. "Chopsticks, moonstar flower, magical creature." He asked her to check whether each was in the common language. She leaned over them. "The first one isn't. It looks more like a pictograph. The other 2 are." "Why do you ask?" "I haven't spoken to people in a long time," he said, laughing awkwardly. "My language system must be getting mixed up." She didn't press him. White-robed mages, Kylan had been taught, do not pry into other people's secrets without cause. Over dinner, Kylan told him what she knew. She'd been researching magical plants in the forest's outer regions. The inner forest, where Iching had been living for 3 months, was considered impassable even for the most powerful mages. Not just dangerous, genuinely too dangerous to attempt without a full specialist team. "There are dozens of creatures in here as powerful as that golden lion," she said seriously. "You're telling me you haven't encountered a single one?" I met the spirit deer once, he said. Kylan stared at him, and more recently the golden lion, but neither of them caused trouble. He smiled. Not one of my traps has even been used. What is your combat class? She asked, now very careful. I'm a farmer. Your certified profession. Mage, archer, knight. Farmer. She took a long breath. In the entire history of this continent, no one has survived alone in the Devil's Forest for more than a few days. Not the highest-ranking mages. Not the grand druids. Why haven't the monsters touched you? He genuinely didn't know. He said so. That night, a deep roar rolled out of the forest. The golden lion was back. Kylan rose immediately, gripping her staff, pushing toward the door. Go, she said firmly. I'll hold it off. You've already saved me once. I won't let you be in more danger. Iching followed her outside anyway. At the treeline, the lion paced slowly. Every time it lifted a paw to come closer, it hesitated. Set it down. Hesitated again. That's territorial behavior, Kylan said slowly. It's acting like it's approaching a stronger predator's territory. She turned and looked at Iching standing beside her. The golden lion was afraid of him. Are you a dragon in human form? She asked, unable to stop herself. Absolutely not. A spirit? A spirit lord? Can we focus? He pointed at the lion. It's about to leave again. Should we do something? Kylan squinted. We could take it down. The materials on a horned lion are worth considerable money. I don't need money. Edo. But I can't beat it. Iching looked at the lion, which was trembling in a way that sat awkwardly alongside its status as a fearsome apex predator. He tried an experiment. Lie down, he said. The lion pressed itself flat to the ground. Kylan's mouth fell open. After a long, bewildered conversation, the truth came out. The lion had originally been chasing Kylan for a specific reason. She'd taken something from its nest. A plant, she explained, producing it from her storage ring. An orchid-like flower with small sparks of electricity dancing on its petals. Thundergrass, the guide told Iching. 50 years old. Excellent magical material. Kylan had been searching for one for years. With it, she might finally qualify to advance to the purple robe rank. Thundergrass was nearly extinct on the continent. Scholars had tried for centuries to cultivate it artificially, and every attempt had failed. The general consensus was that magical plants simply couldn't be grown by hand. Iching held the thundergrass up toward the lion. Is this what you want? The lion transformed from a trembling wreck into something resembling a large cat presented with a favorite toy. Tail raised, eyes bright, hope radiating from every whisker. Iching looked at the plant, then at the empty plot of land by the cabin, then at Kylan. I'm a farmer, he said simply. Kylan started to protest. She'd just explained the centuries of failure, the impossibility. He pointed at the rice field that had been planted 10 days ago and was now almost ready to harvest. Kylan was silent for a long moment. Dry rice, she said carefully, normally matures in about 4 months. He made a thumbs-up gesture. The next morning, using the multi-tool and careful preparation, Iching planted the thundergrass in a suitable plot, gave it what it needed, and told Kylan with complete confidence not to worry. She looked at his face, looked at the impossible rice, and decided, for the first time in her professional life as a mage of proven skill and status, to simply trust someone else's expertise. Kylan stayed for several more days. While the thundergrass grew, and it did grow, fuller and wider every day, new shoots appearing at its base, she and Iching settled into a routine that felt, to both of them, surprisingly natural. She lit fires with a snap of her fingers while he cooked. He explained recipes. She watched with the focus of someone cataloging a new branch of magic. They ate together and talked for hours. The golden lion, which Iching had quietly named Mimi in his head, then settled on Perkunis, after a god from his hometown's mythology, shortened to Per, came every day at approximately mealtime and was fed with increasing generosity. The thundergrass, when it had fully matured and produced offspring, was harvested carefully. Kylan accepted her share, and Iching kept the offspring plants growing in the field.